My parents drained my entire college fund just to keep me locked in a psych ward after they overheard me through the air vent, begging to come home. When I finally confronted them, my dad said, "We've invested too much to stop now." That was 18 months ago. Yesterday he called me, then hung up without a word. Can you imagine waking up in a hospital bed, your parents sobbing, telling you you'd overdosed on pills? But the last thing you remember is just like eating chips in your room? That's how my nightmare began. 3 days later, this Dr. Anderson from a recovery center shows up. He had this calm, confident way about him, telling my parents, "Jordan needs intensive treatment. Our program will heal your entire family." My parents, fresh off this messy, brutal divorce, clung to his promise like it was the only thing keeping them afloat. Sunrise looked like a resort, not a psychiatric facility. Dr. Anderson explained, "Recovery requires isolation. No outside contact for several months." My parents agreed instantly. I still remember my mom hugging me goodbye, whispering, "Dr. Anderson will save us all." The isolation was immediate. No phone, no internet, no visitors. My days were a blur of therapy and accountability exercises. I had to write these detailed confession letters to my family. Acknowledge how you manipulated your parents, Dr. Anderson would instruct. Take responsibility for their divorce. I was so confused, but I quickly learned that resistance just meant worse treatment. So I wrote lies. I confessed to faking depression for attention. I apologized for causing my parents fights. Each letter felt like swallowing glass, but my parents, they ate them up during their weekly visits. "Such growth," my dad cried once, reading one of my false confessions. They actually looked happier than I'd seen them in years, united in fixing their broken child. It wasn't just me. Other kids had similar stories. Danny, 2 years in for just questioning her stepfather. Adam, 3 years for taking his mom's Xanax one time. We all learned to play along or we'd stay forever. 6 months in, my best friend Gabby tried to visit again. Dr. Anderson had blocked every single request, claiming friends would trigger regression. When I begged him to reconsider, he called an emergency parent meeting. "Jordan is fixating on inappropriate relationships," he told them. My parents immediately sided with him. Something just snapped inside me. The letters were lies. I shouted, "You made me write those things." My dad's face went cold. This is exactly the manipulation Dr. Anderson warned us about. They signed forms for reflection therapy. Basically solitary confinement. 3 nights into isolation, I heard voices through the air vent. It was my parents in Dr. Anderson's office. "I just wanted Jordan to sleep," my mom sobbed. I was so overwhelmed with the divorce. I crushed sleeping pills in her water. And then my dad interrupted her, his voice chillingly calm. "It's done. Dr. Anderson says it's better this way." My blood ran cold. My mom had drugged me. My dad had found me unconscious and assumed I tried to end my life. They'd lied to everyone. The stigma would destroy them, he continued. "At least now they're getting help." Dr. Anderson agreed, his voice smooth. "With extended treatment through age 18, we can transition them to adult care." I was never meant to leave. I copied everything I could remember onto my arm, my hand shaking. Returning to my room, I couldn't help but wonder if there was even a way out. The morning medication round came at 6 sharp like always. I sat on my bed, staring at the small paper cup with its rainbow of pills, wondering if what I'd heard through the vent had been real, or just another side effect. The nurse watched me swallow each one, checked under my tongue, then moved to the next room. Within 20 minutes, the familiar fog rolled in, making everything feel distant and dreamlike. During morning group therapy, I studied Dr. Anderson's face for any sign of last night's conversation. He conducted the session with his usual professional calm, discussing healthy coping mechanisms while I searched for cracks in his facade. Nothing seemed different. His smile remained warm, his voice steady, his concern apparently genuine. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. After group, I tried writing down what I'd overheard, but my hands shook violently. The tremors had been getting worse for weeks. Another gift from the medication cocktail. My handwriting came out as illegible scrawls that looked exactly like the psychotic episodes Dr. Anderson documented in my file. I crumpled the paper and flushed it during bathroom break. Nurse Henderson mentioned during lunch that she needed someone to watch her disabled son during her double shift next week. Without thinking, I volunteered. She laughed, not unkindly but with genuine surprise. The other staff members exchanged knowing looks. Henderson patted my shoulder and explained that patients couldn't be trusted with children, especially not ones with impulsive tendencies like yours. Art therapy came after lunch. We were supposed to draw our feelings, but Danny started vomiting halfway through her watercolor. The new medication adjustment hit her hard. While the art therapist called for help, I faced my blank paper. Draw the truth about this place, or create something bland and therapeutic. Dr. Anderson entered just as I finished a generic rainbow. He studied it over my shoulder, nodding with satisfaction at my progress in emotional expression. Helping Danny to the medical wing meant missing computer time. Only 15 minutes per week, heavily monitored, but it was our only window to the outside world. By the time I got Danny settled and returned, the computer lab was locked. Another week without checking if anyone was looking for me, without searching for legal aid resources that probably didn't exist anyway. The state inspector arrived during dinner. We'd been prepped for days about appropriate behavior during the routine check. Just as the inspector started interviewing patients, the kitchen erupted in chaos. A grease fire from the ancient fryer, smoke alarms shrieking. Then Adam collapsed, his body convulsing on the dining room floor. I had seconds to choose. Run to the inspector or help Adam. I dropped beside Adam, turning him on his side while others panicked. His seizures had been getting worse since they'd switched his meds. I stayed with him, timing the convulsions, keeping his airway clear. By the time the medical team arrived, the inspector had moved to the administrative wing. Dr. Anderson appeared, thanking me for prioritizing peer support over attention-seeking behaviors. His hand on my shoulder felt like a trap closing. Later, Dr. Anderson explained to the inspector how some patients created elaborate conspiracy theories about their treatment. I watched through the common room window as he gestured calmly, professionally, while the inspector nodded along. They shook hands like old colleagues. The inspector left without interviewing half of us. Adam, still groggy from the seizure, grabbed my hand that evening. His words slurred but sincere, he told me. Dr. Anderson was the only adult who'd never given up on him. The only one who truly cared. I squeezed his hand back, unable to tell him the truth he wasn't ready to hear. During evening medication distribution, one of the newer nurses accidentally dropped her count sheet. Pills scattered across the floor. As I helped gather them, the medication log lay face up between us. Patient names, dosages, adjustments. My eyes caught my own entry, the numbers higher than last month. The nurse snatched the paper away, but not before I'd seen other names, other increases. The security camera in the corner had recorded everything. By morning, a note in my file documented fixation on staff activities and paranoid ideation increasing. Dr. Anderson adjusted my afternoon dosage accordingly. 3 weeks blurred together after that. The higher doses made everything feel like swimming through molasses. During family therapy, I struggled to remember if the conversation I'd overheard had been real, or just another false memory. Dr. Anderson had been discussing those lately, how trauma could make us create elaborate stories to avoid facing our real issues. My parents brought a specialist to the next visit, a soft-spoken woman who specialized in false memory syndrome. She explained how stress and medication could create vivid, but entirely fabricated memories. My mother nodded along, tears streaming, as the woman described how common it was for troubled teens to externalize blame. I wanted to scream the truth, but the words came out slurred and confused. Evidence of my deterioration, they said. The facility reduced computer time to 15 minutes after someone's inappropriate use. No one would say who or what they'd done, but I suspected my previous searches for legal aid had triggered it. Now we had to submit written requests explaining what we needed to research subject to approval. My new roommate arrived that week, transferred from another unit. She spent her nights screaming about conspiracies, about doctors who weren't real doctors, about parents who'd sold her to the system. The staff sedated her regularly, but her rants seeped into my dreams. Was I becoming like her? Was this how it started? Dr. Anderson called me in for a special session. My recent behavior concerned him, he said. The medication questions, the paranoid ideations, the resistance to therapeutic interventions. For my own safety, he was adjusting my treatment plan. The new pills made me so drowsy I could barely stay awake during group sessions. 6 weeks later, I sat across from my parents in the visiting room, struggling to remember why I'd been fighting so hard. My mother sobbed, watching me stumble over simple words. I heard myself apologizing for making things up, for causing so much trouble. The words felt foreign, but they made my parents smile through their tears. During a rare lucid moment, I overheard 2 staff members discussing Gabby. Something about her situation, meaning one less problem, one less advocate making noise. When I asked directly, they claimed not to know any Gabby. Maybe I'd imagined her too. I found a note in my own handwriting crammed into the margin of a library book. They drugged you, but I couldn't remember writing it. The handwriting looked shaky, desperate, nothing like mine. Another false memory, probably. Dr. Anderson would be proud of my insight. He mentioned extending treatment during our next session just casually. A few more months to solidify my progress. The timing aligned perfectly with my parents' insurance renewal. Coincidence? Surely everything was coincidence in this place. Adam aged out of the program on his 18th birthday, but begged to stay. He had nowhere else to go, no family who wanted him back. Dr. Anderson graciously allowed him to remain as a transitional resident, helping with daily tasks for a small stipend. Adam thanked him with tears in his eyes. It just broke my heart to see how vulnerable he was, how completely dependent. I tried to write everything down to create some record of the truth, but the tremors made it impossible. Every attempt looked like the ravings of someone genuinely disturbed. The harder I tried to document reality, the crazier I appeared. Dr. Anderson noted my compulsive writing behaviors as another symptom. During a family session, I smiled for the first time in months, not because I was happy, but because I finally understood. Fighting hurt. Compliance hurt less. My parents looked so relieved when I thanked them for getting me help. Dr. Anderson documented my excellent progress. 9 months in, I no longer remembered what I'd been fighting against. The overheard conversation felt like something from a dream, insubstantial and probably imagined. All I knew was that resistance brought pain and confusion, while acceptance brought peace, even if that peace came in a bottle measured out in milligrams. The truth I'd promised to tell had dissolved into a pharmaceutical haze. Whatever I thought I knew had been replaced by therapeutic insights and proper coping mechanisms. My parents visited less frequently now, confident in my improvement. Dr. Anderson assured them I was exactly where I needed to be. Then the insurance company's annual review arrived like clockwork. Dr. Anderson reduced my medication dosage by half, explaining that progress reports required visible improvement. Within days, the fog began lifting. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper, thoughts clearer than they'd been in months. But clarity brought no comfort, only fragments of memories I couldn't trust. I sat in the common room, watching other patients shuffle through their routines. Catherine, the new intake specialist, observed from her corner desk, scribbling notes about our interactions. She'd replaced someone who'd asked too many questions about billing practices. The staff turnover rate had accelerated lately, though no one discussed why. During art therapy, I discovered my old intake assessment tucked behind supply shelves. The document described symptoms I'd never experienced before admission. Auditory hallucinations, violent outbursts, self-harm behaviors. Yet, after 9 months of treatment, I now exhibited every single one. My hands trembled as I photographed the pages with the ancient therapy room camera, knowing the film would likely disappear before development. A new patient arrived that afternoon, barely 16. Her parents mentioned something about following our family's example, how brave we'd been to seek help. The girl's eyes held the same confusion I'd felt 9 months ago. I watched her parents sign papers they didn't read, trusting Dr. Anderson's warm assurances. My stomach churned with recognition. The security footage I'd hoped might vindicate me had been overwritten months ago. Facility policy mandated 30-day cycles, conveniently shorter than any investigation timeline. The overnight janitor mentioned this while mopping around my feet during insomnia hour. He'd seen too many kids cycle through to believe in coincidences anymore. Family court extended my commitment based on documented deterioration. The judge reviewed 9 months of progress notes showing steady decline despite intensive treatment. My parents sat in the gallery, holding hands for the first time since their divorce, united in their broken child's need for continued care. The insurance company approved another year without question. I glimpsed Dr. Anderson's name on a medical journal website during computer time. The session ended before I could access the article, but the title mentioned innovative approaches to adolescent treatment resistance. My case study, perhaps? Anonymized and published, contributing to his reputation while I rotted in therapeutic purgatory. Another new patient mentioned their therapist had called my case textbook. Apparently, Dr. Anderson had been discussing my particular form of illness at conferences, even before my admission. The timeline made no sense unless he'd been documenting something that hadn't happened yet, or unless the entire narrative had been predetermined. Dr. Kim, the one therapist who'd shown genuine concern, transferred suddenly after a family emergency. Her replacement arrived the same day, as if they'd known she'd be leaving. I never saw Kim again, though her car remained in the staff lot for another week before disappearing overnight. No one would discuss her departure. I attempted to reduce my own medication by palming pills during distribution. The withdrawal symptoms hit within days. Sweating, shaking, hallucinations that made reality even harder to grasp. The nurse documented these symptoms as evidence of my need for higher doses. Dr. Anderson increased my prescription accordingly, noting my medication non-compliance as another treatment-resistant behavior. Medication time became Russian roulette. Compliance meant fog and compliance. Resistance meant punishment and higher doses. I developed elaborate rituals to manage the daily horror. Counting ceiling tiles, reciting multiplication tables, anything to maintain some semblance of mental clarity. The other patients thought I'd finally cracked. Maybe they were right. Nurse Henderson submitted her resignation after 2 years of service. She stopped by my room before leaving, unable to meet my eyes. She had her own family to think about, she explained. Her son needed stability, not a mother who came home crying every night. I understood. We all made choices to survive. During a family visit, Mom's phone screen lit up with a notification. The preview showed a photo from last week. Her and Dr. Anderson at an upscale restaurant. Monthly support dinners, she explained when she caught me staring. For families struggling with difficult children. The restaurant looked expensive. I wondered who paid. Dr. Anderson offered me a deal during our next session. He'd reduce my medication if I recorded a statement admitting to false memories about overheard conversations. Just a simple video acknowledging my tendency to create elaborate fantasies under stress for my own therapeutic benefit. He assured me it would help process my resistance to treatment. I refused. That overheard conversation remained my only clear memory. Even as doubt crept in, had it happened the night before admission? Weeks earlier? The timeline blurred, but the words remained sharp. My parents had drugged me. They'd lied. Everything else might be negotiable, but not that truth. 15 months in, I could no longer remember when things had happened. The overheard conversation floated in time, unmoored from any reliable chronology. Had Mom drugged me that night? That week? The medications made everything feel both immediate and ancient. Yesterday and years ago, Mom accidentally mentioned my grandmother during a visit. She died peacefully 3 months ago, knowing I was getting help. This was news to me. Apparently, there had been letters, phone calls, an entire relationship conducted without my knowledge. The estate had been settled. My college fund redirected to cover treatment costs. All perfectly legal with me deemed incompetent. I discovered the medication log during kitchen duty. My metabolic panel showed liver damage, kidney stress, symptoms consistent with long-term pharmaceutical abuse. But these could also result from an underlying condition, Dr. Anderson explained when confronted. Perhaps the very condition that had necessitated treatment in the first place. Circular logic, perfectly sealed. Dad faced a choice between bankruptcy and belief. The second mortgage had bought another 6 months of treatment, but the money was running out. During his visit, he studied my face like a stranger. "We've invested too much to quit now," he said. The words sounded rehearsed. Probably from Dr. Anderson's family support group. They drained my college fund next. $40,000 earmarked for my future, now funding my imprisonment. I learned this from paperwork Mom left on the visiting room table. She cried as she explained it was for my own good. Dr. Anderson had convinced them that education meant nothing if I wasn't healthy enough to pursue it. I studied Dr. Anderson's methods like a textbook, learned his phrases, his theories, his preferred responses, started using therapeutic language to gain privileges, spoke about my journey, my growth, my gratitude for this opportunity to heal. Each word tasted like poison, but they earned me ground privileges. This breakthrough performance earned me supervised walks around the facility grounds. I praised my parents' courage in seeking help, thanked Dr. Anderson for his patience with my resistance, acknowledged my own role in creating family dysfunction. The lies came easier now, polished smooth by repetition. Discharge planning began, then stalled. Always right before insurance renewal season. Dr. Anderson found new concerns. Fresh symptoms requiring extended observation. The cycle repeated every 6 months. Hope, planning, sudden relapse, continued treatment. Other patients noticed the pattern. We never discussed it aloud. A new patient mentioned her friend's father had been threatened with legal action after questioning Sunrise's practices. He'd hired a lawyer, filed complaints, made noise, then suddenly withdrew everything, claiming he'd been mistaken. His daughter remained in treatment. The friend wondered if it had been Gabby's father. I wondered too. Fighting the system while maintaining my performance exhausted me. Real therapeutic opportunities passed unnoticed, buried under survival tactics. I might have genuinely benefited from proper treatment, but that possibility had drowned in pharmaceutical fog and institutional abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me, though I kept that observation to myself. My parents spent my college fund, mortgaged their future, destroyed their finances for my treatment. I earned $1 per day washing dishes, saving for commissary snacks. The economic disparity felt deliberate, designed to reinforce dependence. Even if I escaped, where would I go? What would I do? Who would hire someone with my documented history? Newer patients found my calculated compliance disturbing. They saw me as broken, institutionalized, a cautionary tale of what happened to fighters. They weren't wrong. I'd learned to survive by dying inside, performing recovery while my authentic self withered. The Jordan who'd fought back had been systematically destroyed. I asked too many questions about discharge planning during team meetings. My ground privileges vanished overnight. Dr. Anderson explained that focusing on leaving indicated resistance to treatment. True healing meant embracing the process without timeline pressure. I nodded, smiled, agreed, added another month to my mental calendar. Sunrise expanded that spring, adding 2 new units. Demand for adolescent treatment had skyrocketed, Dr. Anderson announced proudly. The renovation included a new administrative wing with marble floors and mahogany furniture. We remained in rooms with peeling paint and broken air conditioning. The contrast spoke volumes about priorities. Mom begged me to try harder during her next visit. They couldn't afford much more treatment, she explained. The desperation in her eyes looked genuine. I realized she'd become as trapped as I was, financially and emotionally invested in believing this worked. My potential freedom lay in their impending poverty. The thought brought no comfort. I asked about medication changes during rounds, trying to understand the constant adjustments. Nurse Vargas, who sometimes dropped things, got written up for discussing dosages with patients. She transferred to day shift the following week, avoiding my unit entirely. Another potential ally lost to institutional pressure. The overnight cleaning crew spoke more freely than day staff. Exhausted from double shifts, they'd mention things within earshot. Insurance fraud investigations at sister facilities, patterns of billing irregularities, class action lawsuits in neighboring states. I filed every detail away, knowing documentation was impossible, but unable to stop collecting evidence. Adam had aged out, but remained trapped by circumstance. No family, no money, no options beyond Sunrise's transitional program. He worked kitchen duty beside me, asking philosophical questions about belonging. Maybe this was where people like us ended up, he suggested. Maybe Dr. Anderson had saved us from worse fates. The Stockholm Syndrome ran deep. I admitted during group therapy that I no longer knew what was real. The honesty felt dangerous but necessary. I still believed something was wrong, I explained, but couldn't trust my own perceptions anymore. Dr. Anderson praised this insight as tremendous progress. The other patients watched me carefully, recognizing performance, but unsure of its purpose. Staff discovered journal pages I'd hidden months ago. The writings revealed something I'd forgotten. I'd noticed Mom's depression before admission. Had seen the pills, the wine, the crying sessions, had said nothing, done nothing, too wrapped up in my own teenage concerns. Dr. Anderson used this discovery to illustrate my historical pattern of neglecting family needs. Then the conservatorship papers arrived via certified mail. Dr. Anderson sought legal guardianship based on chronic treatment resistance and persistent delusions. The court date loomed like a death sentence. If approved, he'd control my medical decisions indefinitely. My parents supported the petition, convinced it was for my own protection. During a rare moment of candor, Dr. Anderson revealed his own tragedy. His son had died by suicide at 16 after he'd missed warning signs. He'd founded Sunrise to prevent similar tragedies, to create therapeutic families for abandoned teens. The pain in his eyes looked genuine. Evil rarely came in pure forms. More often, it wore the mask of misguided compassion. I volunteered for overnight cleaning duty, hoping exhausted staff might reveal something useful. They discussed billing patterns, insurance maximization, the careful dance of documentation. 90% of patients stayed exactly as long as insurance covered. The remaining 10% had families wealthy enough to pay privately. No one left early. No one. The minor victory of blocking conservatorship felt hollow. 18 months of my life had vanished into therapeutic quicksand. My parents cried during the hearing. Relief, disappointment, exhaustion, all mixed together. We'd survived another legal battle, but the war continued. Dr. Anderson already planned new strategies, new diagnoses, new justifications for continued treatment. His diagnosis of persistent delusional disorder had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Months of gaslighting, medication fog, and institutional abuse had created the very symptoms used to justify my imprisonment. I recognized the circular trap, but couldn't escape it. Fighting proved illness. Compliance proved progress requiring reinforcement. Either way, I remained. Everything hinged on the insurance audit scheduled for next month. The company had questions about treatment duration, cost effectiveness, measurable outcomes. Dr. Anderson prepared carefully, adjusting medications to show improvement, coaching us on appropriate responses. The performance would determine everything: funding, freedom, future. I learned to recognize the difference between staff who believed and staff who simply collected paychecks. True believers spoke passionately about saving troubled teens, about Dr. Anderson's vision, about the importance of their work. Paycheck collectors kept their heads down, followed protocols, went home to forget. Neither group would risk speaking truth to power. The insurance investigator arrived with a team of auditors. They interviewed patients, reviewed files, examined billing practices. Dr. Anderson remained calm throughout, providing documentation, explaining methodologies, defending outcomes. He'd survived such investigations before. The system protected its own. I sat across from the investigator, maintaining flat effect as coached. Emotional displays would be documented as instability. Accusations would indicate paranoid thinking. I answered questions simply, directly, without elaboration. Yes, I received treatment. Yes, I took medications as prescribed. Yes, I attended all required programming. The truth remained unspoken. Other families had been contacted. The investigator mentioned patterns had emerged across multiple facilities. Similar billing practices, treatment durations, outcome statistics. The investigation had expanded beyond Sunrise. I felt a spark of hope quickly suppressed. Hope was dangerous in this place. The class action lawsuit materialized slowly. Families in other states had organized, hired attorneys, demanded accountability. Sunrise prepared for bankruptcy, ready to dissolve rather than pay damages. The legal machinery ground forward at a glacial pace while we remained trapped, waiting for bureaucracy to decide our fates. Mom researched the lawsuit obsessively, torn between joining and believing. She'd found my old self-harm scars years ago, had Googled teenage depression, discovered testimonials about tough love facilities. The recruitment had been subtle but effective. Desperate parents, troubled teens, promises of healing. A perfect storm of vulnerability and exploitation. The investigation revealed what we'd all suspected. Dr. Anderson billed insurance for individual therapy, while providing only groups. Documented services never rendered. Diagnosed conditions that justified maximum coverage. The fraud was systematic, sophisticated, barely legal, but proving intent required more than billing irregularities. Insurance coverage statistics painted a damning picture. 90% of patients stayed exactly as long as policies allowed. Treatment duration correlated perfectly with coverage limits, not clinical needs. The pattern repeated across years, across patients, across facilities. Yet, correlation wasn't causation, legally speaking. I watched Dr. Anderson's empire crack but not crumble. He'd built too carefully, documented too thoroughly, stayed just within legal boundaries. The worst he faced was civil penalties, financial judgments he'd avoid through strategic bankruptcy. His medical license would survive. The system would continue. My hatred had shifted from individuals to structures. My parents were victims too. Trapped by sunk costs and manipulated fears. The staff were cogs in machinery larger than themselves. Even Dr. Anderson operated within systems that rewarded exploitation disguised as care. The real enemy was harder to fight. Bureaucracy, liability fears, profit motives dressed as therapeutic concern. The insurance investigator admitted the limitations of her role. She could document observations, note patterns, recommend actions. But patient testimony required corroboration. Staff wouldn't risk careers. Families remained invested in believing. The evidence was circumstantial. The harm difficult to quantify. Justice would be partial at best. Mom mentioned my grandmother's estate lawyer had asked about me during settlement. She'd assured him I was receiving excellent care. Another door closed, another opportunity lost. The world had moved on while I remained frozen in therapeutic amber. 18 months felt like decades and minutes simultaneously. Legal aid lawyers suggested civil suits but required upfront payment. My family had nothing left to give. The lawsuit would proceed without us, benefiting others while we remained trapped by poverty. Dr. Anderson knew this, had counted on it. The system selected for families too desperate to fight back. The insurance audit documents made for dry reading, but the pattern screamed fraud. Dr. Anderson billed for individual therapy sessions while providing only groups. Documented psychiatric evaluations that never occurred. Claimed specialized treatments we'd never received. The investigators found similar patterns across every patient file. 90% of us stayed exactly as long as insurance covered, regardless of diagnosis or progress. I realized both my parents and I were victims of different aspects of the same system. They'd been manipulated through fear and false hope. I'd been destroyed through medication and gaslighting. The hatred I'd carried for months shifted from them to the structures that had trapped us all. They weren't evil, just desperate and deceived. The real evil wore administrative titles and operated within legal margins. The decision to escape the system rather than destroy individuals felt like growth. Though Dr. Anderson would have claimed credit for that insight too. I focused on learning the bureaucratic weaknesses, the insurance loopholes, the administrative pressure points. If I couldn't fight the system directly, maybe I could navigate its contradictions. The insurance investigator mentioned similar patterns had emerged at affiliated facilities across multiple states. Sunrise wasn't unique, just part of a larger network of profitable misery. The scope overwhelmed me. How many kids sat in rooms like mine, convinced they were crazy, while their families went bankrupt funding their imprisonment? During my insurance interview, I maintained perfect flat effect. Any emotion would be documented as instability. Any accusation would indicate paranoid thinking. I answered each question with minimal words, stating only observable facts. Yes, I attended programming. Yes, I took prescribed medications. Yes, I participated in therapy groups. The investigator noted my apparent emotional blunting, exactly as Dr. Anderson had predicted. Other families had been contacted by the insurance company. Some had already joined together, sharing experiences, comparing billing statements, recognizing patterns. The collective evidence painted a clear picture of systematic fraud, but Sunrise had prepared for this possibility, structuring assets to minimize liability. The facility could declare bankruptcy, reform under a new name, continue operations with barely a pause. The class action lawsuit offered hope wrapped in bureaucracy. Lawyers promised potential settlements of $50,000, Maybe more, but only after years of litigation. The company would fight every claim, delay every hearing, appeal every decision. Some families would give up. Others would accept lowball settlements out of desperation. The lawyers would take 40% of whatever remained. Settlement negotiations happened in conference rooms while we waited in our medicated haze. No dramatic courtroom confrontations, no tearful testimonies, just lawyers trading numbers while the meter ran. The bureaucracy ground forward at its own pace, indifferent to the lives suspended in its machinery. I showed increasing signs of institutional syndrome. After 18 months, I'd grown dependent on routine, afraid of choices, unable to imagine life outside these walls. The thought of leaving terrified me almost as much as staying. Where would I go? What would I do? Who would I be without someone dictating my every moment? Truth emerged not through dramatic revelation, but through thousands of pages of billing records. Investigators traced patterns across years of claims. Accountants found discrepancies in service documentation. Statisticians proved treatment durations correlated with coverage limits, not clinical needs. The evidence accumulated in filing cabinets while we remained trapped in therapeutic purgatory. Dr. Anderson's longtime assistant agreed to provide testimony in exchange for immunity. After 20 years of following protocols, she'd grown tired of watching children suffer. Her cooperation proved crucial, providing insider knowledge of billing practices, admission criteria, treatment protocols. She insisted she'd only followed established procedures, never questioning their therapeutic value. The facility agreed to voluntary increased oversight while admitting no wrongdoing. A carefully worded settlement that avoided criminal liability while acknowledging administrative irregularities. Dr. Anderson would face civil penalties he'd never pay, having already transferred assets to protected trusts. The criminal justice system had no interest in prosecuting medical professionals for judgment calls. Financial audits proved systematic fraud, but medical judgment protections made criminal charges unlikely. Dr. Anderson could claim he genuinely believed extended treatment was necessary. Without evidence of explicit criminal intent, prosecutors wouldn't pursue charges. Civil penalties remained the only recourse, and those could be discharged through strategic bankruptcy. Evidence showed 30% of Sunrise patients genuinely needed some form of treatment. This complicated the public narrative. Not everyone was a victim of pure fraud. Some families had found healing. Some kids had benefited from structure and therapy. The gray areas made condemnation difficult. Media coverage remained minimal, focused on financial aspects rather than human damage. Dr. Anderson's breakdown during a deposition revealed the human complexity behind institutional evil. His son had died by suicide at 16 after battling cancer for 3 years. The medical bills had destroyed his finances. Sunrise had been his desperate attempt to rebuild while preventing similar tragedies. He'd convinced himself that keeping kids safe, even against their will, was noble work. The exploitation had been rationalized as salvation. The settlement offer arrived via certified mail. Join the class action and wait 5 to 7 years for potential payment, or sign a non-disclosure agreement for immediate release. The NDA would seal my testimony, prevent me from warning others, silence my story forever. In exchange, Sunrise would discharge me within 30 days, clear my record of certain diagnoses, and provide a small settlement for administrative errors. I chose freedom over justice. The decision felt like another defeat, but I'd learned to accept imperfect victories. 5 years of litigation wouldn't restore my lost months. $50,000 wouldn't repair my relationship with my parents. Public testimony wouldn't shut down the system, but 30 days would see me free. Release orders went out for 12 patients whose insurance companies had questioned billing practices. 47 others remained, their treatments deemed legitimate enough to continue. The selection felt arbitrary based on paperwork rather than need. Some of the sickest kids got released while healthier ones stayed. The logic followed insurance protocols, not therapeutic assessment. Sunrise staff pretended nothing had changed. Morning. Medications continued. Group therapy proceeded on schedule. Dr. Anderson maintained his professional demeanor, discussing transition planning as if the investigations had never happened. Half the staff had already submitted applications to similar facilities. The system would continue with minor adjustments. My parents arrived to collect me on a Thursday morning. We sat in the discharge office reviewing paperwork, signing forms, pretending this was a normal medical discharge. They'd aged years in 18 months. Mom's hand shook signing the papers. Dad avoided eye contact entirely. We'd become polite strangers, sharing a historical connection, but no current relationship. The drive home felt surreal. Familiar streets looked foreign after 18 months of confinement. My childhood bedroom remained exactly as I'd left it, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. My parents had preserved everything, waiting for their child to return. But that child no longer existed. Mandatory outpatient therapy began the following week. Dr. Anderson had recommended a colleague who specialized in transition challenges. Insurance covered 20 sessions. The therapist operated from an office building that housed 3 other Sunrise referrals. The network remained intact, just dispersed across multiple locations. My parents suggested family counseling to process our experiences. The counselor they'd found came recommended by Dr. Anderson's support group. Another node in the network. Another professional who'd validate their choices while pathologizing my resistance. I attended 3 sessions before refusing to continue the charade. Community college enrollment required medical clearance. My transcript showed 18 months of medical leave that required explanation. The admissions counselor reviewed my discharge summary with barely concealed concern. They'd accept me provisionally, pending successful completion of my first semester. Another institution to prove myself stable enough to participate in normal life. The medication withdrawal took months. Dr. Anderson's colleague insisted on gradual tapering, extending my pharmaceutical dependence far beyond necessity. Each dose reduction brought new symptoms that justified slower tapering. The medical establishment protected its own interests through cautious protocols that maximized billable sessions. I got a part-time job at a grocery store, stocking shelves overnight to avoid customer interaction. The routine felt familiar after months of institutional scheduling. Clock in, complete tasks, clock out. No decisions, no interactions, no need to pretend normalcy. My coworkers assumed I was just another weird kid. They weren't wrong. 6 months after release, I still flinched when phones rang at medication time. Still felt anxious when 6 o'clock approached without someone handing me pills. The institutional rhythms had carved grooves in my psyche that civilian life couldn't quite fill. Freedom felt like another form of confinement, just with fewer walls. Mom tried reconnecting through careful conversations about safe topics. Weather, work schedules, grocery lists. We avoided mentioning the missing months, the financial devastation, the family destruction. Dad communicated primarily through Mom, maintaining a distance that felt both protective and punitive. We'd survived as individuals but died as a family. The other released patients formed an informal support network. We met monthly in community spaces, sharing experiences without violating our NDAs. Everyone struggled with similar challenges: medication dependence, institutional habits, destroyed relationships, financial ruin. Some had found stability. Others had relapsed into genuine mental illness, the trauma creating what the system had falsely diagnosed. Jordan from our group succeeded in community college despite everything. Another worked construction, finding peace in physical labor. One had attempted suicide 6 months after release, the institutional trauma proving harder than the original family problems. We all carried invisible damage that no settlement could repair. A year later, Sunrise operated under new management. Dr. Anderson had retired to consulting work, his reputation intact among colleagues who mattered. The facility implemented new oversight protocols that changed nothing substantial. Desperate parents still signed papers they didn't understand. Teenagers still disappeared into therapeutic fog. Insurance companies still paid until coverage expired. The class action settlement finally arrived after 3 years. $18,000 after legal fees dispersed to my parents, who'd paid the bills. They offered to share it. A gesture that felt both generous and insulting. I declined. Money couldn't purchase absolution or restore lost time. We'd all paid prices that couldn't be calculated in dollars. I learned to live with permanent damage. Medication had altered my brain chemistry in ways that would never fully heal. Gaslighting had created persistent doubts about my own perceptions. Institutional trauma had left me hypervigilant, unable to fully trust authority figures. These were my souvenirs from Sunrise, carried forever like invisible scars. My testimony remained sealed by the NDA. Another victory for the system. I couldn't warn specific families, couldn't name particular facilities, couldn't detail exact practices, but I could share general experiences, could mention red flags, could suggest questions parents should ask, small acts of resistance within legal boundaries. The system had won by every meaningful measure. It continued operating, slightly modified, but essentially unchanged. Dr. Anderson kept his license and reputation. My parents remained convinced they'd done their best under impossible circumstances. I'd gained freedom but lost everything else. Time, money, relationships, trust, health potential. 5 years after release, I worked full-time, attended therapy sporadically, maintained superficial stability. To outsiders, I looked like a success story. Inside, I remained that teenager counting ceiling tiles, waiting for medication time, wondering if the voices through the vent had been real. Some prisons don't require walls. The investigation had revealed the truth, but truth without consequences felt hollow. The lawsuit had provided compensation, but money without justice felt like hush payment. The system had released me, but freedom without healing felt like another form of captivity. I'd survived Sunrise, but survival and living weren't the same thing. My story ended not with revelation or redemption, but with quiet endurance. No dramatic confrontations, no satisfying justice, no healing reconciliation, just another casualty of legal psychiatric abuse. Walking through life with invisible wounds, warning no one, saving no one, carrying sealed testimony like a stone in my chest. The system had perfected its methods. Destroy the child. Silence the survivor. Continue operations. I'd learned the hardest truth. Sometimes the bad guys win by staying within the law's margins. Sometimes families destroy themselves trying to help. Sometimes survival means accepting partial victories and permanent damage. Sometimes freedom comes at the cost of justice. Sometimes you live with what happened because the alternative is letting them win completely. The morning medication dreams finally stopped after 7 years. I'd found my own rhythm, my own reasons to continue. Not healing exactly, but something resembling peace. The kind that comes from accepting what can't be changed while changing what remains possible. The kind built on scar tissue rather than fresh skin. My parents and I maintained a cordial distance, sharing holidays and obligatory phone calls. We'd never discussed those 18 months directly. The truth lived between us like a ghost, acknowledged through silence. They'd done what they thought best. I'd survived what they'd done. Neither of us could forgive what didn't feel like anyone's fault, but everyone's responsibility. Dr. Anderson died peacefully in his sleep 10 years later. His obituary praising his innovative work with troubled adolescents. Former patients weren't invited to the memorial service. Sunrise sent a flower arrangement. The industry mourned a pioneer while his victims remained silent, bound by NDAs and the strange grief of losing an enemy who genuinely believed he was saving us. I kept my promise to tell the truth, even if sealed by legal documents. The facts remained. Mom drugged me. Dad covered it up. Dr. Anderson exploited their guilt. The system profited from our collective destruction. I survived but never thrived. Justice came in partial measures that satisfied no one. The facility continued under new names, new management, same practices. This wasn't the ending anyone wanted. Not dramatic enough for fiction. Too common for news coverage. Too complicated for simple moralizing. Just another American healthcare story where profit margins matter more than people. Where legal protection shields medical abuse. Where families bankrupt themselves funding their own destruction. I lived. That had to be enough.